Imagine finding a message from the future, one that hints at a tragedy yet to come, buried beneath the red velvet seats of an old Soho Theatre. A tiny object, insignificant to most, containing a secret that could change everything if only it had been understood in time. Today's story is one of those rare enigmas and mystery that found its way into the Bethnal archives, and it's left us all wondering, who knew, and why did they leave it for us? Felix here. I've got a real puzzler for you today, one that's kept the archive buzzing for years. Imagine this, it's a cold evening in late 1996 in the heart of Soho, London. The theatres are full, the lights of the West End blazing, and the crowds move in and out of shows, laughter echoing in the streets. But in one of those theatres, amid the applause and spectacles of a lively performance, something was left behind. Something small, almost insignificant. That show that night was a popular revival of an old vaudeville act, complete with comedy, song, and dance. The audience was enthralled, and the laughter and cheers masked the quiet slip of an object from somebody's pocket. A device about the size of a matchbox, found beneath one of those seats by a member of the cleaning crew after the show. At the time, it didn't make much sense. A small, nondescript, black plastic object with no apparent function. It was handed in to lost property, where it sat for years, almost forgotten, collecting dust on a shelf in a small box alongside old scarves and gloves. Then eventually, in the early 2000s, when the theatre was clearing out unclaimed items, someone took a closer look at the strange device and noticed it had a tiny connector, unlike anything most people had seen back then. But someone took a closer look and noticed it was a early USB pen, one of the very first models, something ahead of its time. Of course, USB flash drives were first invented in 1998, but USB slots on PCs didn't become mainstream until the early 2000s. The technology was still rare, almost futuristic for the average person. The strange thing was, the tech to read it hadn't even become mainstream yet. It was as if it had been dropped years too soon. When USB drives became more common in the early 2000s, curiosity got the better of the police, and they decided to plug it in. By this time, the USB had already been handed over as a lost item of potential interest. Eventually, it found its way to a department that specialized in unusual findings in the occult branch, which later disbanded in 2007, and its cases transferred to the Bethnal archives. When the USB was finally accessed, they found, or rather, what they couldn't immediately make sense of, was a file containing lines upon lines of binary code. It wasn't anything recognizable, but it was enough to intrigue them. Eventually, the USB found its way to someone with a bit of technical know-how, and the binary was translated. And that's, of course, when things got really strange. The translation code revealed dates, coordinates, and even cryptic messages, all predicting events that would come to shock the world. Among the lines of codes was the date 11/09/2001, alongside a set of coordinates that pointed directly to New York City. It was chilling, awful, precise, like someone knew exactly what would unfold years before it would happen. But what really stood out was a set of additional coordinates, ones that pointed to a field in Pennsylvania. There was a cryptic line accompanying these coordinates that described a plane diverted from its original course by the will of the many. It became clear what the message was referring to, the plane that crashed in Shanksville, diverted heroically by the passengers during the tragic events of 9/11. But what made these events and these findings even more eerie was that the binary code was structured. It wasn't just random sequences, it was deliberate, almost methodical organization, as if someone encoded it with the intent of preserving critical information without drawing immediate attention. Dates and times were embedded, alongside cryptic, fragmented phrases. There were even subtle references to events leading up to and following 9/11, though were less precise. The way the binary was organized suggested an understanding of not only the events but of their significance, almost like a warning to anyone who managed to decode it. Of course, they decoded it many, many years too late. The implications were profound. This was not a simple prediction. It felt like a deliberate attempt to communicate. The details about the plane in Pennsylvania were particularly striking because they referred to the will of the many, almost as if acknowledging the bravery of those passengers who took the matters into their own hands. And of course, it wasn't just a prediction. It was almost like a tribute or an acknowledgement of their sacrifice. The mystery of the USB has left everyone who came across it utterly baffled. Who left it behind? Why did they know? Why Soho? Why in a theatre? During a vaudeville revival, tucked under a seat almost as if by accident? Some believe it was a time traveller's warnings. Others think it could have been some experiment gone wrong, a message never intended for the present but somehow leaked through. Whatever it was, it's a piece of history. An enigma that's now tucked away in the archives, waiting for the right mind to untangle its secrets, a glimpse into something far beyond what we may already understand. The archives data specialist has been driven by this insatiable curiosity. A few weeks ago, he began to run a series of these sophisticated programs on the USB device. He's hoping to trace its origins and find some clue about the mysterious owner. Days and days had gone into nights, and the analysis continued without much to show, until finally, just a few days ago, the unexpected discovery surfaced. Hidden deep within the device were 2 lines of metadata that somehow survived that was obviously a very thorough formatting process. The lines contained fragments of an image file, just enough to pique further interest. With the help of advanced AI reconstruction, the specialists worked tirelessly, running multiple iterations of the algorithm to piece together what they could. Eventually, they managed to reconstruct a partial image. All of the versions seemed to depict a type of cylindrical structure, strikingly similar to the particle accelerator tubes used at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, famous for its experiments on the fundamental particles in the universe. The sight of such a structure was both exciting and also scary. Why would an image of something like that be hidden on such an obscure device? But the real twist came when they examined the metadata associated with the image. It indicated that the file was saved in a format that hadn't even existed at the time the USB was found. Specifically, it was an AVIF file, a technology that only gained traction post-2020, and even more astonishing, the metadata revealed that the photo was taken on March 24th, 2029 at precisely 4 p.m. local time, with the exact coordinates embedded in the metadata pointing to a remote, heavily forest area deep in Russia, far from any populated region, a place hidden from prying eyes. These implications are staggering. Could this image be from our future? Was this USB pen some kind of time capsule, or perhaps a remnant from an experiment involving temporal manipulation? The notion that the image depicted part of CERN's technology, yet was somehow connected to a remote Russian location, has only deepened the mystery. Was there a clandestine collaboration, or was this something entirely new, an experiment beyond our understanding that went horribly wrong? It seems the more we dig, the more questions arise, each more perplexing than the last. Could this USB pen be a deliberate message from the future, a warning of something far more complex or sinister, or was it a fragment of some high-stakes experiment left behind by someone who knew far more than they should? Of course, this mystery remains unsolved, but rest assured it won't be forgotten. The search for answers as always continues, and maybe we'll have to wait until March 24th, 2029 at 4 p.m. to find out the truth. Well, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this little story, and yes, I'll see you again soon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more stories. There are stories that reach out from the dark corners of history. tales that defy explanation and challenge our understanding of reality. Now, imagine being the keeper of such mysteries, the one entrusted to catalogue the inexplicable and guard the secrets that most would fear to even speak of. The air in the archive often feels thick, as if them stories themselves are breathing around me, filling the space with whispers of the unknown. The room is dimly lit, with only the soft glow of an old desk lamp. It casts flickering shadows that dance across the walls like ghostly figures. And today, I have such a story to share with you, an account that remains etched in my memory as vivid as the day I first saw it. As I sit here in my dimly lit office at the Bethnal archives, surrounded by shelves upon shelves of ancient tomes and mysterious artifacts, I can't help but reflect on the innumerable strange and otherworldly tales that have passed through my hands over the last 7 years. The scent of old parchment, worn leather, dust permeating in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of candle wax, and then outside, the muffled sounds of distant traffic occasionally intrude, but inside here it's mostly quiet. A silence heavy with secrets that weigh of unforgotten histories. As a freelance consultant for this unique repository of esoteric and occult knowledge, I have seen and heard things that most of you would dismay as pure fantasy. But to me, they're as real as the air I breathe. Virgil here, by the way. I've been working as a freelancer for the Bethnal archives for about 7 years now. Got my level 3 clearance from the Met after 5 years as a consultant detective. Nothing fancy, just an amateur turned pro. Kind of guy they call when things get weird. But they're not sure if they need a priest or an electrician. Studied a bit of the arcane too, though I got my fingers burnt messing with magic, literally. Now I stick to what I know best, finding answers, following trails and trying to make sure the supernatural doesn't get the upper hand. See, I got a rolling contract with the archives, but the catch is, I have to bring at least one legit case a month, proof and all. One story that particularly stands out in my memory is a tale of mysterious red orbs that appeared in the alleyways over Covent Garden on one moonlit night. It was cold and foggy, the chill biting at my skin like 1,000 tiny needles, and I've been working late cataloguing a collection of rare manuscripts. The flickering candlelight illuminated the room in a soft, weary glow, making the shadows seem alive. The stillness was shattered when a frenzied young man burst through the door of the archives, his eyes wild and frenzied like a dog. I saw them, Virgil. The orbs, he explained, his voice trembling with trepidation. His words were punctuated by the heavy breaths as if he'd been running for miles. They were floating in the alleyways, moving like the will-o-wisps, beckoning me to follow. His words hung in the air, each syllable dripping with desperation. I may have raised an eyebrow in inquisitiveness, leaning back on my chair as I mentioned for him to sit down and catch a breath. The room was filled with an eerie quiet, only the sound of that rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The young man introduced himself as Thomas. He was a researcher with a keen interest in the supernatural. He had been conducting field work in Covent Garden when he stumbled upon the particular phenomenon. The smell of the damp night air clung to him, mixing with the faint sense of trepidation that seemed to emanate from him. Thomas proceeded to describe how the orbs had appeared out of thin air, glowing a deep crimson hue that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. They moved in a mesmerising dance, leading him deeper into the maze of alleyways and cobblestone streets. Despite his fear, Thomas felt compelled to follow on. His inquisitiveness outweighed his sense of self-preservation. The cobblestones beneath his feet were slick with rain, and the air carried the distant echo of footsteps and laughter from the pubs that lined the streets nearby. As he recounted his experience, I couldn't help but feel a shiver of enthrallment run through me. The archives were filled with similar accounts of sightings, spectral apparitions, and the mysterious lights that defied rational explanation. The scent of an aged book and ink seemed to grow stronger as if the stories themselves were awakening at the mention of the orbs. But to hear such a tale firsthand was a rare and exhilarating experience. I urged Thomas to continue, eager to hear the outcome of his encounter with the red orbs, and he explained how they had led him to a secluded courtyard and the air grew heavy with a particular almost otherworldly atmosphere, where the orbs began to hum a gentle lullaby that filled the courtyard, the notes seeming to echo off the old brick walls. The scent of tar, fresh grass and popcorn wafted through the air, a combination that made Thomas's senses reel. The wind whispered through the narrow alleyways, carrying with it an uneasy stillness. And then before he knew it, the orbs had vanished, leaving him alone again in the courtyard with nothing but a strange melody lingering in his head, as if it left an imprint, something intangible but undeniably real, just in the corner of his memory. The courtyard was dark, save for the dim glow of the nearby street lamp, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch towards him like skeletal fingers. I listened intently to Thomas's story. I must admit my mind was racing with thoughts of the innumerable enigmas that lay hidden within the archives. The red orbs were just one puzzle of a labyrinth of riddles that begged to be solved, each more alluring than the last. But before I could respond, Thomas suddenly sat up straight, a determined look in his eyes. "Felix, you have to come with me. I can't let this rest," he said, his voice steadying. "I need someone like you to help me make sense of it." His eyes held a glimmer of desperation, the weight of something unfinished that he couldn't carry alone. Now, to be fair, I did hesitate for a moment, but being the shit-hot detective that I am, I've got a reputation to uphold, and the guy seemed pretty desperate. I was a detective after all. My job was to solve mysteries, right? Prove them right or wrong. The room seemed to hold its breath, and I could feel the stories around me urging me to go forward, as if they too wanted to see what lay beyond the pages of the bindings. Without much further discussion, we grabbed our coats and whatever else we could scrounge, and made our way outside. As soon as I got out into the nice London air, I felt that crisp, cold, foggy night breeze on my back. I knew I should have worn a fucking jumper. But that pure adrenaline racing through me, knowing I was about to witness something fucking strange, that kept me warm. The streetlights flickered above us, their glow barely cutting through the thickening fog. And as we made our way through the winding alleyways of Covent Garden, Pa stopping by for a quick takeaway coffee, Thomas led the way with an almost instinctual sense of direction, his eyes darting around, searching for the crimson glow. We seemed to walk in silence for what felt like tens of minutes, with the fog thickening around us, muffling the sounds of the city. The air was electric, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Then, just as Thomas described, the red orbs appeared, pulsing, glowing, and dancing through the mist. They moved with an unnatural grace, humming their gentle lullabies. They led us deeper into the labyrinth of cobblestones and shadows. And I too could smell the scent of tar, fresh grass, and I wouldn't say popcorn, but something carnivalesque hung in the air, giving the sense of an otherworldly, almost dreamlike quality. The soft crunch of the footsteps echoed quietly, followed by the dense fog that seemed to press in from all sides. My heart was pounding with enthrallment. This was it, the enigma that had eluded us right now before our eyes. The orbs led us further, weaving through the narrow alleyways until the familiar surroundings of Covent Garden seemed to fade away. We soon found ourselves in, an impossible forest, bathed in this luminescent blue hue. The fog seemed to have settled and was rolling around our feet, and the air carried a stale scent of ancient damp bark. Honestly, it was as if we had landed on an alien planet, or another realm that shouldn't exist, yet there we were, standing in this eerie beauty. The forest seemed endless, the trees towering above us, their branches twisting and curling in impossible ways, and that blue glow cast long, watery shadows, and the humming of the orbs seemed to intensify as they floated ahead, guiding us deeper into the unknown. The rustling of unseen creatures echoed faintly, blending with the distant hum of the orbs. I turned my torch on. I checked my phone. No signal. I wasn't taking any chances, so I reached into the inside pocket of my coat, took out an amulet of protection, said the usual incantations, and put it around my neck. I then took a glow stick out, cracked it, shook it, left it on the floor so I could find my way back. And then, being the good old detective, I took out a pen and paper and my dictaphone to ensure I was logging everything I was seeing. Suddenly, the trees parted. We found ourselves in a small clearing. It's as if the centre was a miniature stone circle, like a tiny Stonehenge, formed by a collection of ancient weathered stones. And then the red orbs began to dance delicately above the stones, moving in unison as if performing some kind of ritual. We stepped back. We didn't want to get too close. The orb seemed to hum with a haunting melody that seemed to resonate with the stones themselves, while the clearing was bathed in a soft, ethereal light, where the shadows seemed to bounce off the stones like dancing statues. Thomas and I stood there, spellbound by the sight. The clearing felt sacred, as though we were witnessing something that had remained hidden for centuries. I felt a strange pull. I kind of sensed that we were on the cusp of understanding something prodigious, something far beyond the scope of our everyday reality. And the orbs continued their dance, their glow growing brighter, the blue hue of the forest blending with the crimson light in an otherworldly display. The air grew thick with anticipation, the melody echoing through the clearing as if urging us to comprehend the spectacle before us. And then, as if the fabric of reality itself began to fray, we noticed something peculiar at the edge of our clearing. Parts of a street, sections of a pavement, a phone box, and scarcely dotted street lamps were interspersed among the forest floor, fragments of modern-day London appearing impossibly out of place. It's as if we were standing in the intersection of two worlds, a liminal space where past, present, and something altogether was converged. This dissonant juxtaposition of urbanity and nature converging together made an unsettling beauty. The humming of the orbs grew louder, their dance more frenetic. Me and Thomas exchanged a glance as both of us were equally bewildered and fascinated. Whatever lay at the end of the path, maybe we were on the verge of discovering something that had eluded humanity for centuries. Or perhaps it was just the exit. Whatever it was, as the sun started to rise, it was clear the night was ending and the morning was coming along. The orbs became fewer and fewer, and the strange forest realm became littered with more and more urban parts, until we found ourselves in the alleyways of Covent Garden. The fog lifted, the scent of ancient bark replaced by the familiar city air, and the distant sound of car engines and early morning chatter began to seep back in, grounding us once again in reality. Thomas and I exchanged another glance, a mix of awe and curiosity lingering between us. It's the kind of feeling that makes you want to dig deeper despite the risks. Whatever we had experienced, it had left a mark on us both. A reminder that there are places where the veil between the worlds is thin, and those brave enough to follow may catch a glimpse of the impossible. As I sat back in the dimly lit office of the Bethnal archives, nursing a cup of stale coffee, surrounded by the ancient tomes and mysterious artifacts, the memory of Thomas's encounter gnawed at me like a puzzle begging to be solved. The scent of old parchment and wax candles filled the room, mingling with muted sounds of London waking up beyond the walls. I pored over manuscripts and scrolls, searching for any mention of similar occurrences or symbols that could shed a light on the true nature of these red orbs. Hours turned into days as I delved deeper, the bags under my eyes growing heavy with each passing night into the archive's vast collection of occult text, digging through books that looked like they'd seen better centuries, my mind consumed by the enigma before me. And then, something curious emerged, a pattern of recorded incidents. Ta-da! In the archive, I found a case from 1911, another from 1952, and yet another from 1993. Each account detailed similar occurrences, red orbs appearing, drawing individuals away from familiar streets and leading them into strange, disorientating realms. The sightings occurred every 41 years, as though making a cycle known only to the orbs themselves. As I dug further, I came across the reference to a book written by Cecil Thornborough, an original member of the Wizards' Council during the Victorian era. Thornborough had written extensively on various occult phenomena, but one passage caught my eye. He described fey wisps, creatures from the Celtic otherworld that used their bright lights to lure humans deep into forest realms. According to Thornborough, the wisps were part of a fey mating ritual, leading strangers into their enchanted woods where they would ultimately get lost. And in their dying moments, the fey would plant seeds in their bodies, using them as vessels for a new life. Thornborough's words were chilling, suggesting a sinister purpose behind their ethereal beauty. He also explained that since the rise of industrial towns and cities, the fey's influence had waned. The interference of electromagnetic fields disrupted the boundaries between their worlds and ours. As we had experienced, fragments of our own realm now hung on amidst the magic, making it increasingly difficult for the Fae to ensnare modern humans. The orb's glow was often interrupted by glimpses of the familiar sections of pavement and street lamps, reminders that our world refused to fully surrender to theirs. The orb's ritual could no longer be completed before the first light of dawn, causing them to disperse as the sun began to rise. The connection was undeniable. The Fae had tried to ensnare us, but as they had done to others over the last century, the encroachment of our modern world had created a rift, a type of barrier that they struggled to overcome. The red orbs were no more than remnants of an ancient ritual attempting to survive in a world that had moved on beyond them. For classification purposes, I'm categorising this as a Class 4 temporal and spatial anomaly, a phenomenon that manipulates both location and perception. It kind of blurs the lines between realms. These Fae creatures, once powerful enough to lead humans to their enchanted forests, they're now struggling against the interference of our industrialised world. This case will be logged in section Delta-5 of the archives, designated for occurrences involving Fae activity and multi-dimensional disruptions. You know, it's not just about understanding the past, it's also about recognising how these forces still linger, or how they adapt to a world that no longer believes in them. As always, my search for answers continues. Now, containment and safety measures. The presence of these red orbs and their attempts to lure individuals into otherworldly realms raises a crucial question. Can we contain such anomalies, or at very least, protect those who may inadvertently encounter them? Containment of a temporal or spatial anomaly of this nature is a daunting task, but there are steps that can mitigate the risks. Number 1, first and foremost, awareness is key. Without really revealing the true nature of the paranormal and occult to the public, what we could do is do a safety campaign. We could have subtle warnings about the dangers of wandering alone in certain areas of Covent Garden at night, and we can disseminate these through local businesses and community boards. Maybe warnings that simply advise avoiding poorly lit alleyways after dark, or suggest unusual lights should not be followed, framing it more as a matter of general urban safety. For a more direct containment, we could ask the Bethnal archives or our allied organisations to coordinate with local authorities. We could install surveillance cameras, and if those anomalies take place, we could send a team down to guide people away from the potential danger areas. We could always get the government involved, but that's always tricky and very long-winded. In terms of physical containment, it's unlikely that the Fae themselves can be contained, as their nature is inherently tied to the freedom and the flow of energy between realms. However, ritual wards could be placed in areas with frequent sightings to create boundaries to dissuade or hinder the Fae from crossing over. Problem is, of course, these wards would have to be maintained by trained individuals familiar with the appropriate arcane rites and symbols. I mean, I've got a couple of old hands I know who dabble in the occult, however, they aren't cheap. And as we know,
money is tight these days. We could use protective amulets or charms, distribute them to people who are most at risk, such as people who work nearby, but yeah, that's really not a good idea giving magical items to, what do we call them, muggles. And it's also worth noting that these orbs thrive on the veil between realms being thin, and we also know that electromagnetic devices will stagger and stall some of them veils. So what we could do is stick some more 5G towers around there. We could get some technical consultants to work on refining the technology that's more in line with doing safe electromagnetic bursts. So, you know, there's some options there, but yeah. Anyway, that's all we've got time for today. If you've enjoyed it, like, subscribe, follow, and I'll see you next time.
There are places beneath London that most people would rather forget. Dark corners of the earth that hide secrets too terrible for the light of day. There are stories that have been buried for centuries, covered by the brick and stone of a bustling city that prefers not to ask questions. But sometimes those secrets refuse to stay hidden, and it falls upon people like us to find them. Today, dear friends, we are delving into one such mystery. A story that has haunted these archives and the caverns beneath the city for years. This tale will take us into the depths of an underground labyrinth where something dark and dangerous awaits. Hello, Felix here. This week in the archives has been an interesting one. It's mostly been positive, though with Halloween around the corner, we've officially entered Amber Alert. Security has been posted inside the building just in case of breaches. You never know what might decide to peek out of our world at this time of year. Especially here in the archives with all the esoteric finds in the bottom floor. Anyway, about the story. In the heart of London, beneath the bustling streets and the crowded sidewalks, lies a secret unknown to most. Deep underground, where the darkness seems to swallow all light, there are hidden caves that have remained untouched for centuries, and within these caves there lurks a creature of nightmares. We call it here the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a sinister being, part human, part monster, with a taste for human flesh. It is said to lure unsuspecting victims into the depths of the caves with its hypnotic voice, promising treasures and secrets beyond imagination. But once its prey is within its grasp, the Wendigo reveals its true form, a twisted, grotesque creature with razor-sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. Nobody knows how the Wendigo came to be or why it haunts beneath the caves of London. Some say it's a cursed soul doomed to walk the underground forever, while others believe it is a demon sent to torment the living. But one thing is certain, whoever dares to venture into the caves never returns. Now you're probably wondering, caves in London? I've never heard such a thing. Well, simply go onto Google and type in London caves, and I can assure you lots of things will pop up. But I must warn you, don't go there on your own. There's an account that's always intrigued me, and it comes from a man who stumbled upon the Wendigo himself. He wasn't a member of the archives, just an ordinary person with extraordinary experience. I'll tell you his story. This man had been drawn to the hidden caves out of sheer curiosity. He'd heard the whispers of something lurking beneath the city, tales of strange lights, disembodied voices calling from the darkness. Armed with only a lantern and the courage of someone who absolutely has no idea what he's getting himself into, he ventured in to the caves. As he descended into the darkness, he could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on him, the cold air wrapping around him like a shroud, and the walls of the caves were slick with moisture. The only sound was the echo of his footsteps reverberating off the stone. The deeper he went, the more he felt the sense of something watching him, an unseen presence lurking just beyond the edge of his lantern's glow. And then suddenly, he heard it. A soft, melodic voice drifting through the darkness, calling his name. His heart raced as he followed the sound, feeling the strange pull pulling him deeper into the cave. He knew he should turn back, but that was a fool's errand. But something compelled him to continue. As he rounded a corner, he was greeted by a sight that chilled him to the core. Standing before him was the Wendigo. Its twisted form bathed in the dim light of his lantern. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent hunger, and its lips curled back in a grotesque grin.
You have come seeking secrets, little one.
The Wendigo hissed, his voice like a knife scraping against stone.
But the only secret you'll find is the taste of your flesh on my lips.
His heart pounded from his chest as he realized the danger he was in, but he refused to back down. Steeling himself, he confronted the Wendigo, his voice unwavering.
I'm not here for your secrets.
His gaze steadily.
I'm here to uncover the truth, whatever it may be.
The Wendigo's laughter filled the cave, echoing off the walls with a bone-chilling resonance. It took a step closer, its long claws fingered reaching out to touch him.
You're brave, little one,
it murmured.
But bravery will not save you from me.
But the man wasn't alone in the darkness. As the Wendigo lunged for him, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man with eyes as dark as the cave himself, his presence commanding and powerful. He brandished a silver dagger, a blade gleaming with faint light.
I, the guardian of the cave, will let no harm come to this man,
he declared, his voice ringing with authority. The Wendigo snarled, the gaze shifting from the man to the guardian before him. He recognized him. He knew the power he wielded, and with a hiss, he scurried back into the shadows, his body clinging to the darkness until he was nothing but a shadow himself.
You have been warned, mortal,
it whispered, its voice a mere whisper of the air.
Know this. I will be waiting.
With the Wendigo gone, the guardian turned to the man, his expression grave.
You should not have come here, child,
he said, his voice tinged with concern.
The Wendigo is a dangerous foe, one even I struggle to defeat.
But the man was undeterred. He looked up to the guardian, his eyes filled with determination.
I cannot back down now, he said. I've come too far to give up.
The guardian studied him for a moment, his eyes searching for any hint of weakness, and then, with a nod of acceptance, he offered the man his hand.
Very well, I will help you. But be aware, the Wendigo is a force of true darkness and will stop at nothing to protect its secrets. So come with me and stay close.
So together the man and the guardian delved deeper into the caves, their footsteps echoing through the darkness like a heartbeat. Each twist and turn brought them closer to the Wendigo's lair, closer to the truth that lay hidden deep within the earth. So, I know exactly what you're going to say. Who on earth is this guardian fellow? Well, after some research, we haven't really come up with very much, but we're very sure that it's the spirit of a medieval knight that probably would have died in the caves many hundreds of years ago and ever since has been looking to fulfill a quest. As they ventured further into the unknown, they could feel the Wendigo's presence growing stronger, its malevolent energies surfacing the very air around them. But they pressed on, their resolve unwavering, their spirits unbroken. At last they reached the heart of the cave, a cavern so vast and dark that it seemed to swallow all light. And there, in the centre of the chamber, they found what they had been seeking, another hidden chamber sealed off from the rest of the world. They stepped inside and they were greeted by a sight that took their breath away, for the walls of the chamber were covered in intricate carvings, ancient symbols that pulsed with a strange, oddly light, and at the centre of it all, surrounded by a ring of fire, lay the Wendigo. It smiled at them, its eyes gleaming with a fierce intelligence.
You have come too far, mortals,
it said, its voice a sibilant whisper.
But you'll go no further. The secrets of this chamber belong to me, and I will not let you uncover them.
But the man and the guardian refused to be cowed. Together they stood before the Wendigo, their hearts filled with courage and determination, and as the creature lunged for them, its claws slashing through the air, they struck back with a ferocity born of desperation. And then the battle ensued. At this point, the man describing the battle stood up and started making whooshing sounds and kicking and punching the air, so I can only assume it was quite a glorious battle. His lantern casting flickering light across the chamber, and the Guardian, his movements fluid and precise, he dealt blow after blow to the Wendigo, driving back each strike with his mighty sword. And at last, with a final decisive blow, the Wendigo fell, its twisted form collapsed into the ground with a heap, and as its body dissolved into shadow and dust, the chamber began to tremble, the walls around them shaking with a fierce, unrelenting force. "We must go now! The death of the Wendigo has unleashed a power we have no hope in controlling." Together, the man and the Guardian fled the chamber, their footsteps echoing through the darkness as they made their way back to the surface. But as they emerged from the light of day, the Guardian had simply vanished. For beneath the streets of London, in the hidden caves that lie forgotten by time, there lurks a darkness more sinister than any could imagine, and only those brave enough to face it will uncover the secrets that lie buried deep beneath the earth. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the story for today. We're sending our teams down to do a bit more investigation before we categorise it and actually confirm whether it was a Wendigo or not. Wendigo should leave some residual energy behind, so we will be able to double check to see if this story is real or just made up. But nevertheless, please like, subscribe and follow, and I'll see you next time. You ever heard of the story of the haunted pumpkin patch? Born from the blood and hatred of 1,000 deaths, the pumpkin carved with a twisted face into something alive, something hungry for flesh. Picture this. It's a crisp autumn night. There's screams of livestock cutting through the air, and a twisted, grinning pumpkin moves through the fields with a hunger you can't even imagine. The ground cold beneath your feet, the smell of damp earth, and the unsettling rustle of corn stalks swaying even though there's no wind. Well, tonight, we're going there. So settle in, because this isn't just another ghost story. It's one of those tales that gets under your skin. Hello, Virgil here. The past week's been a bit of a roller coaster. I've been freelancing for the Bethnal archives for about 7 years now, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that paranormal never sleeps. The archive's in the basement of a nondescript building, with walls lined with old books and artifacts that carry the scent of dust and parchment. The air always feels a little heavy down there, like the weight of history pressing down. I had a case on Tuesday involving a haunted piano. Turns out the spirit of an old composer was trapped inside, angry at anyone who dared to play his music wrong. The piano room smelled like old wood and polish, and every time someone hit a sour note, you could hear the keys rattle angrily, almost like a piano was hissing at them. Then Wednesday came around and I had to check out a poltergeist in Hackney. The poor old lady there thought her house was cursed, but turns out it was just some old runes carved into the attic beams. Easy fix, but a lot of dust. The attic was quite cramped, filled with forgotten boxes, and every time I moved the floor creaked like it might give way. Now, Halloween approaches. We've officially hit Amber Alert. Security's been posted in the building, just in case of any breaches. This time of year, well, it draws things in. Strange things. So with all that, I figured it was a good time to tell you this story. The tale of cursed soil and a pumpkin patch you definitely wouldn't want to visit. I don't get spooked easily. After all, got level 3 clearance from the Met, and I've been chasing the paranormal for years. You know, I've seen my fair share of weird stuff. But even I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I got reading through these notes about that patch of land somewhere in Greater London. It was a cursed place that seemed to have a taste for violence. The descriptions spoke of a strange stillness and emptiness that seemed to suck all the warmth out of the air, and when the air would blow, it felt hollow, like it wasn't really touching anything. I'm sitting here at my desk at the archive, pulling out my notebook as I recount this legend. The room's dim, just a single desk lamp casting long shadows across the shelves of ancient tomes. The heating system is humming faintly, and every now and then an old wooden beam creaks above me. Now, this is in the heart of Greater London. There was once a battlefield where two great armies clashed,
the Saxons and the native Britons locked in a desperate struggle. The ground was soaked with blood, and the earth seemed to tremble with the weight of its violence, absorbing the hatred, the anger, the pain. They saw the soil itself turn black from the darkness that seeped into it, and over time, the land was abandoned, the battlefield forgotten, and nature reclaimed it, as it always does. But the air there carries a strange metallic tang, almost like blood even after all these years, and when it rains, the ground gives off the smell that makes you think of rusted iron and something more primal. Years later, farmers settled there, unaware of its dark history beneath their feet. They tilled the soil, planted their crops, but they didn't know what kind of darkness lay dormant beneath it, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The fields were lush, almost unnaturally so, with corn stalks that grew taller than a man and pumpkins that seemed to swell overnight. It was as if the land itself was trying to hide its true nature beneath a veneer of abundance. This story feels like it's taken a life of its own, every piece begging to be solved. The air here seems cold now, like a chill's creeping in from the past, something unseen just beyond the edge of the light. One autumn, a man named Thomas decided to carve out one of the largest pumpkins in his field. Maybe it was a whim, maybe it was just something he thought would be fun. A scarecrow with a pumpkin for a head to ward off the birds. And there was something about the land. The darkness had seeped into every root, every crop, and that pumpkin wasn't just any pumpkin. That night, the pumpkin came alive, its carved face twisted into something malicious, something evil. It slithered off the scarecrow's post, moving through the fields, driven by hunger, an insatiable thirst for blood. The wind howled through the fields, carrying a scent of damp earth and something else, something rotten, something wrong. Even here in the archive, surrounded by the dusty tomes and the comforting hum of the old lights, it feels like the shadows grow a little bit deeper, like the darkness is listening in. Thomas woke up in the night to the screams of his livestock. The sounds echoed through the cold night, bleeding with the rustling of the cornstalk, making it impossible to tell where the noise was coming from. When he ran outside, he found the thing feasting on his flock. Its grin wide, its eyes glowing with an unnatural red light, and the air was thick with a coppery smell of blood, and the ground beneath his feet felt wet and soft, like the earth itself was bleeding. In a panic, Thomas grabbed a pitchfork, tried to fend it off, but the creature, it was so strong, and with a laugh that could chill a man's soul, it knocked him to the ground. As Thomas lay there, the world around him seemed to blur. He could hear the crunch of his flock being devoured, the creature's grotesque chewing echoing through the otherwise silent night. His heart pounded, the icy grip of fear paralysing him as he watched the thing move closer, its grin widening with every passing second. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, the air thick with the rancid stench of decay. And as the creature lunged, Thomas's vision darkened. He thought it was the end, but then a burst of light cut through the gloom. His wife, her face pale but determined, emerged from the farmhouse, armed with a flaming torch. She thrust it into the creature's form, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The fire hissed, and as it met the unnatural flesh, the creature screamed, retreating back into the shadows, its form melting away into the darkness. Thomas survived, but he was never the same again. They say he went mad from what he saw, that he could feel the darkness still watching him. Even after the pumpkin rotted away, the darkness just didn't disappear. It went back into the earth, biding its time, waiting for the next fool to stumble across it. The fields were never quite the same. They seemed emptier, quieter. Birds no longer landed there, and the wind seemed to avoid it, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. And now, here we are. People are still scared of that land, and maybe for a good reason. That soil is tainted. You can feel it when you stand there. It's like something's breathing beneath your feet. So, this is Virgil from the Bethnal archives, documenting the cursed land of Greater London. We're looking at a possible Class 4 residual curse, something that's lingered here since an ancient battlefield was soaked in hatred. The darkness doesn't rest. It waits, but the question is who or what will find it next. As I glance around this archive, the quiet settling deeper as the night wears on, the room does feel heavy, the air thick with the echoes of the past. I'll be filing this one in section Delta -3, Cursed Earth, Haunted Lands. And if you're listening, remember, some places aren't meant to be disturbed. Not everything buried should be unearthed. And that's all we got time for today, folks. With Halloween upon us, be careful. The veil is thin, and the things that lurk beneath the surface are always searching for a way back in. So if you find yourself out in the fields tonight, or even just walking home through the dark streets, keep an eye out for anything unusual, a shadow that moves when it shouldn't, a chill in the air that feels too cold, a strange rustling sound with no source. The darkness is restless, and it might just be looking for someone to invite it in. Sleep well, but stay wary, my friends. Halloween is the night where anything can happen.
I awoke in the dead of night to a sight that filled me with dread. There she was, the old hag, hunched over my body, her decaying face twisted into a grotesque smile, her eyes glinted with malice. Hello everyone, Felix here. Today is Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. Guy Fawkes night, as we say in jolly old England. I hope you're all well. I just returned from a much needed break with my wife, Sarah. We spent an entire week in the Cotswolds. Lovely place, absolutely beautiful. Rolling hills, quaint cottages. Oh, it was everything we needed to recharge. I also wanted to say a big thank you to all the new subscribers who've joined us recently. Your support means a lot, and it's exciting to have you with us along for these strange journeys into the hidden corners of London. While I was away, the intern did his best to keep the channel updated. He's a good lad, and he told me he's even got that freelance at Virgil recording some tapes too. Apparently they're rather interesting, so keep an eye out for those. Okay, now let me tell you about something that happened during my trip. It's a story that honestly I wasn't expecting to come back with. The Cotswolds has always held a certain allure for me and Sarah. The rolling hills, the quaint villages, the charming cottages seemed like the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of our everyday lives. As an archivist at the Bethnal archives, I do spend most of my days surrounded by dusty old documents and musty books. Sarah, a graphic designer, well, she's always buried in her computer screen, creating stunning designs for her clients. We both needed a break from our perspective fields, and the Cotswolds seemed like a perfect place to find some peace and relaxation. We arrived at our cosy bed and breakfast on a crisp autumn evening. The owner, a friendly, elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins, welcomed us with open arms and showed us to our charming room. The exposed wooden beams, the roaring fireplace, the plush four-poster bed made us feel like we'd stepped back in time. Well, as we settled in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The shadows seemed to dance in the corners of the room, and the strange chill in the air hung. Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, brushed off my concerns and pulled me into bed, wrapping me in her warm embrace. As I drifted off to sleep, a sense of unease settled over me. And lo and behold, I awoke in the dead of night to a sight that filled me with dread. There she was, the old hag herself, hunched over my body, her decaying face twisted into a grotesque smile. Her eyes glinted with malice, and her mouth hung open as if she was trying to consume my very soul. My limbs felt heavy, as if an invisible weight pressed down on my chest. I tried to move, I tried to call Sarah, but my body refused to obey. Panic setting as I realized I was experiencing what is known as sleep paralysis. This is a terrifying phenomena that I had read about in my research during my time at the archives. However, I grounded myself, I'm quite proud to say, forcing my eyes to scan each corner of the room, reminding myself where I was. Slowly I closed my eyes, focusing inward in my mind, and I began to recite a Latin incantation, the words coming to me almost instinctively. Non habes potestatem hic, barely audible at first, then louder as confidence surged through me. The words formed, my arm slowly began to move, and I felt the oppressive force start to lift. The hag actually recoiled, her twisted features contorting in terror, her gnarled hands clawing at the air before she dissolved, fading into nothingness. I had banished her back to wherever she came from. I lay back in my bed, my heart steady as I processed what had just happened. You see, over the years I had picked a thing or two up regarding magicka, ancient rituals and spells that most people dismiss as mere superstition, but now faced with the reality of an actual malevolent entity invading my dreams, I was able to defend myself. The next morning I woke to find Sarah still sleeping peacefully beside me, unaware of the supernatural encounter that had taken place in the darkness of the night. I decided not to burden her with the details, instead choosing to keep my newfound knowledge hidden, locked away within the depths of my mind. As we explored the picturesque villages of the Cotswolds, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sense of a darkness hung over the towns. Shadows flitted at the edges of my vision, and the local churches were riddled with strange symbols, unmistakably Masonic. You see, these symbols suggest an ancient connection, perhaps to some hidden order or a long-forgotten ritual that once held sway over the villages. But the Masonic symbols, although hint at power and syncrecy, I do find it fascinating that they are more spoken about and more aligned in people's minds with the uncanny than is actually true. For the modern Templar Order holds more truth to those dark rumors, and they are the ones who operate in the shadows, twisting old beliefs into something dangerous while hiding behind the veneer of tradition, all in pursuit of their own mysterious goals. But, as Sarah always says, you, Felix, are a hammer, and everything you see are nails. Yes, I must admit, when you do get into this kind of business of the paranormal, you feel like everywhere you go there's something strange. Sometimes it can just be the wind, nothing more. As our trip drew to a close, Sarah and I found ourselves taking the train back to London. The gentle rocking of the carriage and the rhythmic clattering of the wheels on the tracks was a strangely soothing sound after the eerie quiet of the Cotswolds. The London tube was busy as ever, yet as we moved through the bustling underground, something jogged my memory about something. A story in the archives that has always unsettled me, and even today we don't have a solution. The story was about an entity that had reportedly been sighted on the Metropolitan line, the oldest of the London Underground lines, specifically between Finchley Road and Baker Street. You see, there's a strange occurrence that only happens under very specific conditions. Witnesses report that between these two stations, as the lights flicker and the train hurtles through the darkness, a man in a bowler hat suddenly appears, seated, reading an old newspaper from the 1960s. The paper is large, covering his face entirely, and he seems to be sitting there as if he belongs despite his outdated clothing and the strange sense of displacement that surrounds him. It's said he only appears late at night, when the carriages are nearly empty, and always between these two particular stops. The train moves through the tunnel, the lights flicker, and for 1 minute he's there. He doesn't make a sound, he never looks up, he just sits, turning the pages of his yellowed newspaper as if it's still in the 1960s. People who've seen him describe an overwhelming feeling of dread, a sense that they must not acknowledge his existence. The air becomes thick, almost stifling, and the tunnel seems to stretch on forever, as if the train is moving through another world entirely. There are a few stories of people who have made the mistake of trying to talk to him, One account is from the late 1990s. It tells of a young man who, perhaps emboldened by the drink or simply out of curiosity, leaned over and asked the stranger for the time. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, the young man was gone, vanished without a trace. The authorities chalked it up to a missing persons case, but those who knew the legends understood better. The man in the bowler hat doesn't like to be disturbed. Another witness, a woman named Clara, claimed she saw him one Friday night. The train had been emptied out after a busy day and she was on her way home. She said she felt it before she saw it. The chill, the sudden silence that fell over the carriage. When the lights flickered, there he was. She remembered the way her heart seemed to stop, her body frozen in place and her eyes were drawn to the newspaper he held. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his gaze behind the pages, an oppressive, unseen pressure that made her skin crawl. Clara didn't speak to him. She kept her head down, eyes fixed on the phone, praying silently for the train to reach the next station. And when the lights flickered again, the man in the bowler hat was gone. The air seemed to rush back into the carriage. The oppressive feeling dissipated as quickly as it came, leaving Clara shaken but relieved to see the familiar lights drawing near. Now, to wrap this unsettling account based on everything we know, I would classify this as a Class 4 residual haunting. Unlike entities that are inherently malevolent, this phenomena seems to be a lingering echo from the past. Perhaps a rifting time that allows a spectral figure to manifest under certain conditions. It is a haunting with a pattern bound to a specific stretch of the Metropolitan line, and it carries an eerie aura that impacts those who've witnessed it. I would suggest to protect yourselves, I would advise against acknowledging the entity. Do not attempt to interact, do not make eye contact, and whatever you do, never speak to the man. His presence seems to react negatively to any form of direct engagement, leading to disappearances that remain unexplained. Should you ever find yourself on that late-night train, be cautious. Averting your eyes and minding your own business might just be your best defense. This is something I'll be logging under Section Gamma 2 Phantoms and Temporal Distortions on Public Transportation. Remember, sometimes the most mundane places are where the unexplainable chooses to manifest. And so we returned to our normal lives in the bustling city and I carried with me the knowledge that I was no longer just a humble archivist of the Bethnal archives. I was a wielder of magicka, a master of ancient rites and incantations. Well, almost. Ready to face whatever dark forces dared challenge me. And as I held Sarah close, her trust and love anchoring me to the mortal world, I knew that the horrors of the night would never defeat me. For I was Felix, the magician of the Cotswolds. Thank you for listening today, and have a lovely, wonderful, explosive Guy Fawkes night. Before we begin, let me give you a taste of what lies ahead. Picture the dimly lit confines of an early morning bakery. Flour dust hanging in the air and an inexplicable metallic voice echoing through the speakers, getting louder, closer and more distinct with each passing day. And then imagine a shadowy presence that just stands out of reach, looming over a terrified baker while the only lights in the building flicker and die. This is the kind of story that makes you question what lingers in the dark corners of London, and I assure you, once you hear it, you will never forget. Felix here. Today is Thursday, November 7th, 2024, and I hope you've been keeping well. It's been quite an eventful week here in the archives. The intern's been sorting out old records. It's always a delight to see how enthusiastic he gets, even the smallest details. And yes, I've come back from a short break, but no rest for the wicked, as they say. We're heading into some unsettling territory today, and I think it's going to be one of those stories that lingers with you long after you hear it. This one was sent in by one of our field operatives who got the exact details straight from the horse's mouth. It's eerie, unnerving, and exactly what you would expect when dealing with the secrets that linger in London's forgotten corners. So, without further ado, let's dive in. This takes us back to the summer of 2012, when the Olympics were bringing in crowds from all over the world. You would expect Hackney to be bustling, but instead it was strangely quiet, almost deserted, except for a handful of lost tourists. It was into this eerie quiet that Glenn White, a bread delivery driver, found himself driving each morning before dawn, working for a small sourdough bakery in Hackney Wick. The bakery itself was nothing remarkable from the outside, just another warehouse unit, but what happened inside was far from the ordinary. The air inside of the bakery was thick with the scent of yeast, flour, and the lingering warmth of the ovens. The place had a distinct atmosphere, a mix of comforting bakery aromas and an underlying, almost metallic tang that hinted at something less benign. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a cold, harsh glow that could barely reach into the shadowy corners, giving the entire place an unsettling feeling. Glenn would start at 4 a.m. He would fire up the coffee machine, scavenge for leftovers from yesterday's bake, and load up the bread float, a nickname for the electric delivery van. The night baker, Carla, would usually be there before him, her music drifting out from inside. Unsettling noise tracks that seemed almost designed to make the solitary building at 3 a.m. feel more haunted. The sound of it was weirdly fitting, and Glenn couldn't shake the feeling that the music suited Carla somehow, as if she too carried a haunting weight about her. Carla often looked pale and tired, like the shadows had already claimed part of her. At first, Glenn figured it was just the nature of night work, but eventually she confided in him. There was something strange about the bakery's sound system. They had an iPad set up to control the speakers throughout the space, but sometimes the music would just stop, cutting out abruptly, and then came in other sounds. Clanging, metallic, rhythmic. At first, it was distant, almost like a murmur, but each time it had happened over the months, it had grown louder, more distinct. The air would grow colder when these sounds started, the warmth of the ovens seeming to vanish as if the heat itself was drained away. Carla tried to turn the iPad off. She even unplugged the speakers entirely, but the noise kept coming. And the worst part? It wasn't just random noise. Carla swore it sounded like voices, like someone or something was trying to speak. Not in a language she recognized, but low, grating metallic words, twisted beyond comprehension. Glenn, of course, tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was interference. Maybe flour had gotten into the equipment. But he knew, deep inside, the way Carla's eyes darkened when she spoke about that, it wasn't as simple. One morning, Glenn finally heard it for himself. The bakery was dimly lit, the smell of fresh bread mingling with that ever-present metallic tang. And then, just as he'd come back from a delivery run, he noticed something was wrong. There was this thick, acrid smell in the air. The ovens were burning, black smoke leaking from the edges. The oppressive scent of the scorched bread filled his nostrils, clinging to the back of his throat. He rushed in, trying to switch them off, pulling open the doors, but he couldn't stop the smoke from spreading, the cracking of burnt loaves echoing through the empty bakery, and the sense of unease settled over him. Where was Carla? And that's when Glenn looked up into the bakery's makeshift office. It was a little platform built halfway up the interior wall with a flimsy wooden frame around it. Usually it had a dim glow from the PC screen that was always left on, but now the light flickered. It's in fits and starts. Carla was standing up there, staring into the screen, completely still and silent. And that's when Glenn noticed something else. There was a shadow beside her, something just out of the reach of the light. Not a person, but a presence, a shifting, barely visible outline that seemed to loom over her. And that's when the metallic voice came in, louder and louder, grating and echoing around the empty bakery, blending with the flickering light of the PC. It was as if the entire room pulsed with the noise, and then the walls themselves vibrating with each harsh syllable. Glenn shouted her name. Carla! His voice echoing off of the concrete walls. And that's when Carla turned, her eyes wide and hollow, her hands jerking out as if to push something away. The light snapped. The entire bakery plunged into darkness, and then silence. Complete, unnerving silence. Carla walked down the stairs, her expression blank, as though she'd just woken up from a nightmare that she couldn't quite remember. Her footsteps were heavy, echoing off the metal steps, each one filled with a dreadful finality. Glenn couldn't bring himself to ask what she had just seen, or who or what had been up there with her. And Carla? Well, she didn't offer any explanations, simply moved on, ignoring him, turning back to her work like nothing had ever happened. But of course something had happened, Glenn knew that much. There was a small window high on the far wall, the only source of natural light when the shutters were closed. When Glenn had arrived that morning, the sun had been up. But when he looked at the window while Carla climbed down those stairs, there was nothing. Like the outside world had ceased to exist. Not very long after that, as you can probably imagine, Glenn quit. He found himself a new job. He left the bread float behind and moved on with his life. He never saw Carla again. He never even dared to look at the bakery again. And not too long after that, that bakery in Hackney Wick closed, and the entire building was torn down. It was as if the developers wanted to erase any trace of whatever had happened in there. It's hard to say exactly what went on in the dark. However, there are whispers that talk of entities that feed on isolation, that seep into the cracks of our world in places where time seems to stretch thin. It's hard to say what exactly went on in that dark, flower-dusted space, but there are whispers, talks of entities that feed on isolation, that seep into the cracks of our world in places where time seems to stretch thin. I guess if I had to classify it, and I do have to classify it, I think I'll put it under Class 5 Sentient Residual Entity. A manifestation that, while not necessarily malevolent, feeds on the energy around it. A residual haunting that somehow gained awareness. The kind of things that find solace in the dark, forgotten places, and grow stronger with each frightening glance, each whispered fear. If you ever find yourself alone in an old bakery and you hear something that sounds like metal scraping, well, I guess it's best to leave the bread where it is and walk away. For now, this account will be logged under section Epsilon 3 of the archives. Recordings of auditory phenomena like hauntings. And if you're listening to this, remember, the strange and uncanny have ways of finding those who aren't looking for them. The air might feel colder, the shadows might seem deeper. But, my friends, always trust your instincts. Stay safe, everyone, and until next time, keep your wits about you. Felix out.